I'm curious about, I really want to talk about this miracle experience. So let's talk to Patrick in Arkansas. Patrick, I'm curious, what
Yeah.
makes you question whether or not you've experienced a miracle?
Well, I'm a former theist, and I was baptized in the Southern Baptist Church, First Baptist Church in Cabot, and a small town in Arkansas. Anyway, last year in July, my wife had a, excuse me, this is tough talking about still.
Sure. No worries.
She had a reaction. She had a reaction to medication. It stopped her breathing, and then it stopped her heart, and she died in my arms. And she was revived by a neighbor. We were outside in our pool, and anyway, a neighbor did CPR until paramedics could get there and took her to the hospital. She was on life support for a couple of days, unconscious, and then she woke up, and she lost her eyesight, and then 3 weeks later, due to another medication, she developed clots in her lungs, and she had a pulmonary embolism. And they worked on her for 2.5 hours. I'm not kidding. They worked on her 2.5 hours. She was revived 4 times, and she was clinically dead for 90 minutes throughout that 2.5 hours. And then she was on life support, dialysis, 24-hour dialysis. They were keeping the medical equipment and the medication she was on was keeping her alive. Okay. Mm-hmm. And during that at the end of 2.5 hours, they gave her something called a clot buster. I can't remember the medical term the medicine was, and she bled out everywhere. So she was on full life support for 11 days, and she woke up and they were able to take her off. And she ended up losing her eyesight. She had lung issues. She was in physical rehab. She was in the hospital for a couple more weeks and then in physical rehab for a month before coming home. But there's 2 things. One, all the doctors, her cardiologists, her pulmonologists, all of her specialty doctors that she now has, and even the nurses and that we run into in the last year call her a miracle, a medical miracle. They don't know how she survived. During that 2.5 hours, I was in with our adult children outside where they were doing the life-saving measures, and one of the doctors came out and said, "We've been doing this a while." And I said, "How long have you been doing it?" And he said, 20 minutes. And I said, "Well, how much longer can you go?" And he says, "We usually give up by now." And I said, "No, you get in there." And they kept working on her. So, and she had the MRI showed very minimal brain damage. It looks, like I said, her eyesight is gone. She can see a little bit, but it's all fuzzy. She's legally blind, right? So anyway, we were talking that during the first time that she went down, she crashed, she died, and was revived. She saw a vision of us, myself, our 3 adult children, our 2 grandchildren, and one of our grandchildren is severely disabled. He's nonverbal, non-mobile, and she described the vision as we were glowing from the inside. We provided warmth to her because at first she was in a dark area. She was in dark space. She didn't know where she was. She was scared. And then we came to her, and we were what she called our most perfect self. We didn't have our tattoos. We didn't have piercings. Our daughters dyed their hair, and they didn't have their hair dyed. And our disabled grandson could speak to her. And we were all telling her, "We need you. Don't leave us. We need you. Come back to us." And she didn't have a vision the second time, or that she doesn't remember. But you know, I've read for 20 years. You know, I'm in my mid-40s, so I've tried Judaism, I've tried Catholicism, I've tried, you know, Methodist. You know, so I've read up on Buddhism, Hinduism. So I now consider myself agnostic, on the leaning towards atheist. But you know, we were told that people who are under for even 5 minutes, 10 minutes, can have permanent brain damage, and people.
Well, so I get that this is a.
So anyway,
I get that this is a
yeah,
scary thing, and I apologize for everything that you've gone through, and this sounds like it's a lot to put on anybody. And see, a lot of things that when we talk about, especially something medically related like this, like you're telling the story, and I get that this is an absolutely terrifying time in your life. And
right.
It takes a toll on you for sure. As somebody who does this doesn't sound miraculous to me at all. And I think that when doctors say the phrase like this is a miracle, I think number one, we don't know for sure whether or not these doctors were religious themselves, but they might be projecting their own belief system onto the situation. But oftentimes, like colloquially, when somebody says that this is a miracle, they're saying that this is something outside of what is statistically likely, but it's not impossible. So we do know, describing your whole story, the fact that number one, she had a reaction to a medication, which tells me this is a hypersensitivity issue, went into respiratory arrest, and then with CPR was able to be resuscitated the first time, which going into that, awesome. We have, especially with a respiratory arrest, because you're going to go into that before you go into cardiac arrest. It's a while before your heart's going to stop, but you have somebody doing high quality CPR. And if you're doing high quality CPR, you can get blood to the brain. That is the number one priority. That's why we do CPR. And the first medication to be given in CPR is epinephrine, which is going to directly be a solution for the hypersensitivity reaction to begin with. So how that could have all played out absolutely makes sense to me. You're talking about life support and dialysis and things. All of that makes sense for the body's natural response to shock. And because that's what's happening here. Everybody dies from some type of shock, whether that be you don't have any more blood volume or your heart stops pumping your blood, or whether it be there's so much acid in your blood that causes multi-system organ failure, etc. Like everybody is going to die from shock. And at some point, the body prioritizes what needs to be saved. And how it does this, your blood vessels clamp down in your extremities and to all unnecessary organs. So that includes your eyes, that includes your kidneys are going to be some of the last to leave because they're helpful for clearing this acid from your blood. But at some point, if your body has to prioritize your brain or your kidneys, it's going to prioritize your brain. And even with doing CPR for long term, you're only putting enough pressure on the heart to move blood basically to the brain and back. You're just maintaining this circulation. So how we see like these visions, like even if you don't have permanent brain damage, you have an anoxia or lack of oxygen in the brain to cause certain parts of it to not work as well in the moment, because you're trying to prioritize the things that are going to keep you alive. And so you can get some interesting visions and things because your circuitry of connecting your senses to the parts of your brain that receive that and interpret it are not communicating properly because your brain's just trying to survive it all. So I get why this is frightening. I get why it can be seen as a miracle, but to me, it's not so much as like, I'm not even close to going to a place to acknowledge that it would be supernatural. I'd say it's impressive that the statistics were in your favor that day, and I'm very happy that they were. But this is something within very unlikely, but still possible statistical likelihood. And I don't know if JMike has anything that you want to say. I just kind of
I'm not gonna pretend like I'm gonna follow that up. But no, let's let Patrick go ahead. I think you guys are perfectly
Yeah,
fine.
my,
with this
my, my
discussion.
wife and I joke that she's the luckiest unlucky person on the planet. To have 2 minutes and basically stop her life. And then on the first time she went down, our neighbor was supposed to be somewhere and something happened and she was late 30 minutes, and that's when she heard us yelling for help. And she was a nurse, and she is a nurse, and she was there. Also, interesting that you said epinephrine. That's one of the first things. We thought she was having an allergic reaction because she has allergies, and we have EpiPens. And I injected that right when she passed.
See, that's a factor. That's a factor that being mentioned. Like, I figured, like, either somebody had given her epi for the allergic reaction, or they would have done it during CPR. And like, that's one of the key things that's going to save you. And if she got that really quickly, you have that working very fast. So like, when I hear people talk about medical miracles, this is something that, like, I want to take a step back, because there's a lot, especially from a layperson's perspective, that are factors that we don't really think about. Like, how much does this really matter? And from what we know about things like CPR, we know that even though CPR in general has a low likelihood of success, we do know that high quality CPR, if you do CPR well, your chances of survival go up incredibly. The same thing if you have someone ACLS trained that can give epinephrine, your chances of survival go up even further. So like, maybe, I can't say for sure because I don't know the exact circumstances, but perhaps like one of the biggest factors in this is that early intervention, and maybe that caused the cascade further on to be more favorable. And I don't know. And something else, like, there's a lot of variables here that we could, instead of going to a supernatural being, we could just say that I'm buffering a little bit. I don't know if you all can still hear me. But we can go to that this is just an unknown. Like, the reason why this person survived that long is just something that medically we don't have a good reason to explain that yet, and it requires further study. But yeah, either way, I'm not inclined to say that this is supernatural at all.
No, well, yeah, I hear you, and I understand, and everything had to come together perfectly that day, the first time, and then the second time. The second time, she was still recovering from the first time, and
right. But so you're looking at this from you're looking at this from an N of 1, right? Because you're seeing like this is a one-time thing, because this is, what are the chances that my person is going to survive this one time? But you're forgetting all of the people who've died and their CPR was not successful. And now this was the rolling of the dice that was favorable, and you were maybe N equals a few thousand people, and you just happen to be that statistical anomaly.
Yeah, and what I was going to say, and it happened to her twice. Twice in 3 weeks, 3 weeks apart, and so I look at it as a miracle, not in the sense of supernatural, because I look at it, she's a strong woman. She's been through 10 years of cancer. She survived a cancer that her brother didn't survive. It was a genetic cancer. And so she's strong. And I have other stories like that with family members who survived the odds. And it's just, I think, a combination of genetics, a combination of people say the will to live, the body's will to live. But she asked herself, like, why me? Why did this happen to me to begin with? Like her talking about herself. And then what about, these shootings all over the place? We had another one today or yesterday, it just, why did some people live and some people die? And it's like chaos. And I lean towards, when people say it's a miracle and that there's a super being, some invisible super being working on lives, that sounds great and all. I mean, I want to believe, like the old X-Files thing, I want to believe, but I think it takes away from the survivors, the people who it affects, the people who strive and thrive.
Sure.
Beyond.
Yeah, because
And
I had a buddy.
I had a buddy from the.
Real quick, Patrick. I want to, if I can, just real quick, I want to jump in.
Yeah,
there.
Yeah.
Because like a buddy of mine, I went to an atheist convention in April like last year, and a buddy of mine got to Captain Dadpool got to get up on stage, and it was really cool watching a friend in the community get a following that he does, and then hosting this kind of, or like headlining, this type of convention. And he mentioned this story about, being in a hospital and seeing his newborn, get birthed, and, hearing like, had this reflection, like, why am I, lucky, right? Or like, what about other people that weren't so lucky, or a situation where,
right,
you lose your kid. And what I think is like, I can't do what Ben does with the smart big brain on Ben, but what I can do is kind of think of this as layman as I possibly can, which is that to me, it's going to be a miracle if we didn't have these types of statistical anomalies. Like, that would be really weird if we didn't find these people in these cases with these like extremely unlikely events occurring. It just seems like if you know stuff about inferential statistics, that those events are going to occur in much smaller numbers, but there's always going to be an agent within those numbers asking themselves like, well, why did this happen to me? Right? That's just going to be kind of constitutive of what goes with the whole fact that it could happen at all. It's almost like similar to like the anthropic principle, not like looking at it in this way of like, well, of course, you'd expect, this outcome given the statistics. And I don't find it to, like you said, among this chaos and all this stuff, it actually seems to be the way that the natural world operates. And that, I'm someone that thinks if we didn't have those occurrences and somehow we're devoid of those statistical improbabilities, like that in and of itself would seem like a miracle to me. If that makes sense. I don't know if that's a great point or anything to what's going on. That's where I'm like, it seems like this is what we would expect. Yeah. It just seems like you would expect these events to occur. And by the way, not to take away from what you went through or anything like that. I'm just, because I'm glad that you guys have come out of this on a more favorable side than what it could have been.
Yeah.
But just on like the general kind of scale thing, it's like what you expect, unfortunately. It seems like, but I don't know.
Right.
Ben, I'm gonna.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
if you need to let me go, that's okay.
Well, I was gonna say, I'm gonna move on to other callers, but I didn't know if you and Ben wanted to kind of hash anything out before we go on.
Well, Ben.
Well, you can always if you ever watch one of the other shows on the ACA, I'm on Talk Heathen more frequently than I am here. So if you want to call onto that show when I'm on and continue this discussion a bit more, or if you think of anything else you left out or anything else that you have questions about, you can call over there, and I'd be happy to pick this up.
Okay, wonderful. I just found your channel on YouTube today, actually, and going through some of the videos, and I was hoping to talk to somebody about it. This is just really interesting. My mind's blown. Everybody we talked to, the mind's blown about my wife's case. It's been a struggle. We're happy that we're on the other end. But for me, I'll say this was a miracle in the sense that, she survived 1 in a millionth, twice, on the science side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or is that?
I mean, like I see what I see I see the thought process in your head. At least I see what you're saying. Like I get how the gears are turning in your head. It makes sense. But I think, actually, I would just let Ben chime in, because this is your thing. It's like sitting next to Forrest talk about biology and stuff. I'm like, I'm not even gonna fucking pretend like I can even get to that level. So I'll just and
I think too, like, statistically speaking, even though chances are low from surviving cardiac arrest, keep in mind, well, number one, the initial one was initially a respiratory arrest, which is easier to reverse because you can correct the respiratory component. And then the only reason she went into that cardiac arrest the first time was because of the respiratory arrest, which was fixed. So I don't know the exact stats on that situation, but just for anyone going into cardiac arrest, I think the stats are, if you've had CPR it's a 10% chance that you'll survive after cardiac arrest. Granted, like that's usually with a good amount of disability afterwards. And of course, if you multiply this out for each time that this person went into cardiac arrest, sure, your chances get lower and lower, but it's not even like a 1 in a millionth chance, especially with the fact that she had such early intervention. Taking it into like a 10% is a low chance, but it's still like better than I think you're granting it. So,
Right. Okay.
All right, Patrick. Well, thank you so
much.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one, and yeah, man, just hug the people around you and love them, because you know you've had experience I've never had, and give a hug for everybody for me, and cherish people around you, because the world sucks in a lot of ways.